Welcome to Huff Goes to the Movies. My name is Eric Huffman II. Most people call me Huff. Some people know I love going to the movies. And if you're someone who comes to YouTube to search for movie-related content, then chances are you're in the right place. Go right ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way you can stay up to date on everything that I'm doing here. Thank you so much. It is greatly appreciated. And now on to the review. Bones and All is directed by Luca Guadagnino. It is an adaptation of a novel by the same name. The film centers around Marin, played by Taylor Russell, who is a cannibal. And early in the film, she has an incident where she sort of reveals this to a group of her high school friends. And I'm being kind when I say she reveals it to a group of her friends. This sends her and her father having to leave their home. And a little bit later, her father actually abandons her. He leaves her with nothing but a cassette tape where he recounts other cannibalistic incidents in her life, as well as her birth certificate, so that she can hopefully track down her mother, whom she's never had any relationship with. This sends Marin on a cross-country road trip all throughout the United States. She encounters other cannibals like Sully, played by Mark Rylance, as well as Lee, played by Timothée Chalamet. Those two form a pretty strong bond early on, and so they venture across the country together in the hopes of trying to learn more about Marin's family history. And that is pretty much the setup that you get. It is a cannibal road trip love story. The strengths of the film come in the form of the performances. Taylor Russell is someone who I have been a fan of since seeing her in Waves back in 2019. Timothée Chalamet continues to deliver good work. And Mark Rylance plays a very interesting sort of antagonist here in the story. I will say more on him in just a little bit. Now, for context, I have never seen any of Luca Guadagnino's previous work. I haven't seen A Bigger Splash. I haven't seen I Am Love. I missed out on Call Me By Your Name, and the reactions to his Suspiria remake really didn't motivate me to check that one out. So going into this, I didn't really know what to expect in terms of style or any narrative tropes that the director had previously used. But I will say that among the strengths of this film, other than the performances, which I think are pretty solid, it is the atmosphere on display here. As Marin and Lee travel across the United States, they find themselves sort of venturing through these rustic, small towns. And while the film doesn't really seem to characterize these towns in a way that makes them feel regressive or you know, sort of downtrodden, I think that they serve as a really good complement to the type of story that's being told here. As the film progresses, Marin and Lee do meet other cannibals, and this presents a whole host of different challenges and different moments of tension. One of my favorite scenes in the film is actually one that involves them sitting at a campfire with Michael Stuhlbarg and David Gordon Green. Yes, the same David Gordon Green who just directed 3 Halloween movies. That scene is filled with so much tension, and it seems a bit rushed at first until you realize that as a cannibal, I mean, there really is just this sense of dread that comes with everyday living. Whether it is trying to fight off these urges or the risk of exposing yourself. And I don't say that to sympathize with people who eat people, but it is interesting that a film in which our main characters are introduced as imposing a threat to literally anyone around them, that they themselves are facing these threats as they travel across the country. Taylor Russell and Timothée Chalamet do have a really interesting on-screen chemistry here. And so while the love story is maybe not the direction that you would think something like this would go, it is interesting to see how they bond and how they sort of start to depend on each other. I mean, they are in a unique position in that their urges really do make them outsiders, but also they really do find ways to keep each other safe, and they find ways to balance each other out and keep them from going off the rails a bit. Now, as someone who hasn't seen Guadagnino's previous work, I can't really speak to how well he has done with character development in previous films. But I will say that in this film, while the performances are very strong, I do think that there are moments where I just want a little bit more from Chalamet's character. We do learn a good deal of his background and his family dynamics, but at times it seems like the film is really trying to get something out of him, or at least something out of his character that doesn't feel earned. He goes through these different moments, but because the character doesn't get enough development, they don't quite land as hard as they do. Which is not to say that I didn't enjoy the film. I actually found it to be quite good, but there are some things that do prevent it from being great. Earlier I mentioned Mark Rylance, and I think that his character is a mixed bag. The performance itself is effective and creepy, and he really is the antagonist here if the film were to just have an antagonist. But how he functions in the plot at times doesn't make a great deal of sense. When we're introduced to him, he seems like a necessary added dynamic for Taylor Russell's character and her journey, but as he appears later in the film, I think that he just feels a little awkward and at times very much out of place. It's almost as if this film wanted to be one thing, but because of the subject matter, they kept leaning on Mark Rylance's character to make the film something that it didn't need to be. And I don't want to say too much, I don't want to spoil anything, but you know, it's weird to see an actor doing good work despite the fact that their good work is not really in service to the story. But Taylor Russell really is the show stealer here. I mean, again, I've been a fan of hers since seeing her performance in Waves, and I think it's interesting to see her sort of be elevated to a lead role here. I think she handles it very well. I think that she's asked to play a bunch of different notes, and she hits them with great effect. And as we learn more about her family backstory, it really does lend this narrative to being something that is all the more tragic, all the more compelling, and by the end of the film, it really does leave you with a lot to process. So I can't compare this to Guadagnino's previous work, but I do think that Bones and All is a good, solid film, a very effective film. The violence is pretty intense at times. This does not shy away from its subject matter. This does not shy away from playing on the fact that, you know, these characters have this urge that they want to satisfy, but despite the fact that they may not be the villains of this story, it does mean that they are sort of left with no other choice but to do some things that we would consider to be downright evil, downright disturbing even. And the film does that fairly effectively. The film does give you that feeling of, oh man, I could maybe root for these characters until they remind you that they are cannibals. And it's kind of hard to get on board with that. But overall, I found this to be a good film, not a great film. There are a number of scenes that feel a little rushed, and by the end, it feels like it should have gone, I don't want to say a different direction, but it feels like the steps we took to get to the end maybe should have gone a different way. But overall, I think that while this film is not for everyone, for people who can handle the subject matter, this is definitely one that I think people should check out. I mean, it's not playing to the broadest audience. It's not even really playing to the broadest audience for people who like horror or horror-adjacent things. But I think the performances here are well worth the watch, and I can't wait to see what Taylor Russell or Timothée Chalamet do next. If you like this video, please do hit the thumbs up. Go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date on everything that I'm doing here. More reviews are on the way. Once again, my name is Eric Huffman II. Stay sweaty, my friends. I will see you at the movies.